Hello guys, I have just received 2 upgrade parts for my computer. A new power supply, the Supernova 750G2. It's 80 plus gold certified. It was a nice Black Friday deal. And I also got a Silverstone AR03 cooler because the stock cooler on the AMD FX 8350 gets really loud with its small fan. So yeah, I'll be installing this in my computer today. This is a fully modular power supply, by the way. It's got lots of cables and stuff. It's really cool. You really see the difference when you buy a quality power supply. Well, I did have a Cooler Master one, but it's not quite the same.
Okay, I'm gonna fast forward a lot of my video because it was way too long. Here I'm talking about how a few days prior I put my fans on the outside of my case because I knew that they would hit the CPU cooler. In fact, the bottom one already rubbed against the power supply. In a moment, I show you that I threaded the wires through the ventilation holes by removing the plastic clips, thus not requiring drilling. As I start removing the wires, the connectors and everything, I talk about how everything is wrapped in this black spiral thing that keeps everything together, because those are not sleeved wires on this power supply. Also, that white wire down there is an extension for the power switch header. I've put a header on the back of my case to plug in an external power switch. And I did that little mod because my computer tower is inside my desk behind the door. So this saves me the trouble of opening and closing the door all the time. I did not want to remove my video card from the case, but in the end it turns out that this helps a lot with moving things around the case. This takes a lot of space in there. It's pretty easy to take off. I mean, it's just 2 screws, a clip, and then it slides out. It's a pretty decent card. It's the GTX 760. I'm looking at all the parts in the bag right there and ogling my video card. I mean, I haven't looked at it much after putting it in the case. Now, I was having a hard time with this main motherboard connector because it was tied down with a wire tie in the back. With this gone, it's much easier to remove. The next step I figured was to remove the power supply from the case to give me even more room to move around and having everything loosened up. I'm also talking about how my power supply came with some black screws, but since the case is silver, I'm just gonna keep the silver screws to put back on there. Alright, it's getting out. It was kind of a tight fit behind the hard drives there. Now that Cooler Master 500 watt power supply was just not quite enough for my setup, specifically because of the video card. Have I had a lower end graphics card, I would probably have kept the old power supply. Just showing off the new one here, how it's fully modular and how it looks shiny. There was a little plastic thing on top of this little vanity plate, however you want to call it. It's got a nice little pattern on it. Unfortunately, it's never going to be seen again until I remove the power supply, because it's facing down. This case, even though it's a cheap case, was designed to have the power supply at the bottom, sucking the air from the bottom. I'm guessing either my phone stopped recording or I got interrupted at that moment. So, time to screw it back in, of course. Now here I had some resistance from screwing the silver screws, so I try to screw in the black ones, but I realize it's exactly the same kind of resistance, so I switched back to my original idea of putting the silver screws in. I just need to torque them a little bit more. I notice how it does not use exactly the same holes for screwing it in, which was interesting for me to look at. It's not quite aligned perfectly either. Again, talking about that cheap case. With a little bit of prying though, it helped and I was able to get that screw in. And here's the last screw. Just making sure everything is tight, because when I assemble something I usually put all the screws in but not tight, so that there's a little bit of wiggle room if something needs to move a bit. Now, as I'm putting those black screws away, I realized that I forgot to test the power supply. This power supply came with a little plug with a wire jumper to have it start by just plugging it in. And I'm gonna test that right now before this installation gets more involved. I just want to make sure that it's not dead on arrival. Actually, when I first opened the box, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be able to test it before I put it in, and then of course I did put it in before testing it. But it's not too bad. Now I'm just trying to figure out which end goes where. Because on one end it's the, your traditional connector, and on the other one it's split. But I noticed that on the power supply it's got that split pattern there, and I'm demonstrating how you can only put this little clip in one direction, one orientation. I flipped the switch on, and the power supply did not make any noise because it's got an eco mode on it. So I turned the eco mode off, the fan turns on, and I'm clear to proceed with the build. I need to remove that in order to be able to plug all the other wires beforehand. I'll be plugging them in the power supply from the back to the front. Now it's just a question of routing the wire through the case. That one was a little bit tricky because of the big plug, but coming from that other side makes it easier because of the split plug. So I could just get one in and then get the other, and it went in. Okay, this time I think I was interrupted, but let's continue. And it fits right in. I'm gonna tie it down just like the previous one. For now I'm gonna leave the bottom part loose because, like I was saying, I'm gonna start plugging the stuff from the back of the case to the front of the case so I don't block the way to the connectors on the power supply. Okay, so I need a little bit more light in order to see how I'm gonna plug this in. This is the 8-pin connector for the CPU on the motherboard. Now, in case you didn't know, there's a little trick to get this wire down to the power supply, which is to lay it flat against the motherboard, and the graphics card has a notch that will straddle that cable. You'll see it later how nice it ends up, At this point I realized that I put it backwards. Well, technically backwards, because it fits both ways. This end I'm plugging in right now is a little bit more flexible, so it's gonna make a nicer bend to follow the motherboard compared to the other extremity. But in reality, both plug in the same holes the same way. They're pretty much interchangeable. The plugs are designed to plug in only one way so the wires don't cross or anything, so there would not have been any risk, but just for the sake of making it nicer, I switched it back around. Now, I think I got interrupted again. Either it's my phone or my roommates, but anyway, I'm looking at those VGA cables for my graphics card. And like there's a 6-pin connector on the motherboard that I could have put one in there, but since there's 2 connectors on the graphics card and it worked like that before, I'm just gonna not plug that on the motherboard. I'm gonna plug the VGA cables straight into my graphics card like before. Having a little trouble here putting the second screw in, but everything fits alright. I just showing off the little dust cover for the SLI plug, and this card also came with a dust cover for the PCI Express plug. Okay, time to plug in the hard drives. I have the, what is that, the SATA power connectors, and looking at them I'm a little bit confused because it's not quite wanting to go in, and you can see which is the top and the bottom of the cable. So I try again, it's not working. Now I'll put this cable on top of the graphics card so I don't have to deal with the weight of it, and now it plugs in. I just noticed that those screws were a little bit loose because I moved my hard drives around a little bit earlier. Okay, so I have to make sure that the harness of wires that plugs for like all the buttons and LEDs does not interfere with the power cables for my drives. Now this MSI motherboard is pretty nice because it's got like a little plug for that pin header that you plug all your switches in. So if you need to remove that, you just pull on one thing, and when you put it back you just plug in another thing. Now I went ahead and removed the stock CPU cooler. You just flip a switch, and I'm examining the design there. It's a pretty decent design, except that the fan is so small. I mean, this thing is loud. Oh my. Alright, just unscrewing the brackets now from the motherboard. I wish I could have used the back plate that was stock on there, but the screws for my new cooler did not fit in the threads for that. Kinda sucks. So before I lose anything, I'm just gonna try and screw. I'm actually looking at the screw pattern. Yeah, I'm gonna screw back the brackets on the back plate so that I don't lose anything, like the screws and the back brackets themselves. This will prove useful because I can clip in the CPU cooler, the old CPU cooler, in the brackets and put it in the box. Maybe I can I'll keep it for a little bit and maybe sell it at some point after I determine that the new cooler is reliable. Or I could keep it as backup. I don't know. You never know. So the new brackets got a plastic covering all over the backside. Just like feeling around how it fits. Looking at how it's gonna screw in. Actually, my screws there, they came with some, I think they're plastic, I'm not sure exactly the material, but some little washers to prevent them from damaging the copper pads on the motherboard. And I just noticed that the threads on the back plate was they were a bit tight with the screws. And I'm checking to see if it's not just the plastic blocking the holes, which in fact they are blocking the holes a little bit, but still the threads are really tight, so threading those thumb screws in was kind of, it was not the easiest of things. So what I decided to do is to thread them in and out each of the thumb screws into each hole, so that it kind of forms the threads a little bit to each screw, so that when it comes time to put it in on the motherboard, I'm not gonna have such a hard time putting them in. And let me tell you that this was a tedious process, so much so that I cut the video there and did all that threading and unthreading of the screws, and now it's ready to put on the motherboard. So the first screw is in. Second one, I start with the top because gravity holds everything upright. I also noticed that the thumb screws are not centered in the holes. Like the original backplate had some sort of a bushing that was bigger than the screw and fit in. So I just check in to see if everything is positioned alright, if it's not too low, because the gravity did tend to pull the brackets down, and I figured that I would leave them down so that they would not slide because of gravity eventually. Now I'm putting the first, another part of the brackets. I showed briefly that if you put them the other way around, they're going to block the access to the CPU. So they have to sway, if you want, to the outside. There's thermal paste. I just put the size, pretty much of a grain of rice on there. And I lay the case down to put the cooler in. I'll switch to a close-up view of the cooler here. Here is the screw, final screw. You can see down there that there were thumb screws to put the other parts of the bracket. I can use the screwdriver to screw it in, of course. And I'm trying to get some even pressure on both sides, because you don't want to crank down on one side completely and have your cooler crooked and then pinch like the edge of your CPU when you tighten the other screw. So I'm going very slowly. I'm trying to feel the torque I'm putting on the screwdriver between each side.
Alright, so it's pretty tight in there, and if I move it, the motherboard moves. The most important test I have to do now is to see if this is gonna fit. Okay, that looks good. Oh yeah, man, it fits! It's not even touching. I mean, I didn't hear it scratch or anything. Oh man, fits just right. I did well to measure in advance, because let me tell you, that fits so close.
Okay, so now it's time to get the cooler fan, which has some nice little rubber pads to prevent vibration to be transmitted. I don't know if you've seen in my previous shots, but there's plenty of room to clear my RAM. This is often a concern about those type of coolers. I could probably buy a second kit of RAM and it would fit in very close to the CPU cooler. Now I'm having a bit of a hard time on the left side, that's like in the top of the case. If I had a taller case that had some room there, it would be much easier. But I removed the little rubber foot, and I think I finally get it at some point. Okay, just pull through the hole of the fan, and then there's only one left, which is the bottom one on the left side. There you go. Now I'm just stating that Silverstone provided extra little white feet if I want to put a second fan for a push-pull configuration. I'm taking another look at the RAM and the clearance, And now I don't have quite enough light, so I get my flashlight to plug in the CPU cooler fan. Like, there's just a way to twist it so that the cable stays on top of the cooler and doesn't fall down, which is pretty nice. I'm pretty much admiring my own work right here.
And now for man, this is too bright. And now for a test start. This is my external power switch. It's turned on. I hear the drives. And as of now, it's pretty darn quiet. Hopefully, it will stay quiet when gaming. Alright, let me just turn this off. Ah, crap. There you go. Okay. Hold it 4 seconds and it should shut down.
Alright, well that was it for the installation. If you want to see more of my rig, just let me know in the comments below or hit the like button. You can also share and stuff like that. Really appreciate you guys watching my videos, and have a good one.